Ever wondered how to cook a perfect butter steak at home? Well, you're about to discover a simple yet delicious way to do just that. Imagine the sizzle as your steak hits the pan, the aroma of melting butter, and the first bite of a perfectly cooked buttery steak. It's a gastronomic journey that's easy to embark on, right in your own kitchen. The process is straightforward, the ingredients are simple, but the result? Absolutely mouth-watering. Ready to become a master of butter steak? Let's get into it. First things first, gather all the necessary ingredients. To create our butter steak, we'll need a few key items. Let's start with the star of the show, the steak. You can choose any cut you prefer, be it a tender filet mignon, a richly marbled ribeye, or a juicy sirloin. Next, we'll need some butter. Unsalted is best, as it gives us control over the seasoning. Speaking of seasoning, we'll also need some salt and pepper. Freshly ground black pepper and coarse sea salt will truly elevate the flavor. To infuse the butter with more depth, we will be adding garlic. A couple of cloves will do the trick. And lastly, for an aromatic touch, we'll need some fresh rosemary. This herb pairs beautifully with steak, lending it a subtle woody flavor. With these simple ingredients, we are set to cook a restaurant-quality butter steak at home. The next step is to prepare the steak. Now, this is where the magic begins. To start, you want to ensure that your steak is at room temperature. This is a critical step that often gets overlooked. If the steak is too cold, it won't cook evenly, leaving you with an overcooked exterior and undercooked interior. So, leave your steak out on the counter for about 30 minutes before you plan to cook it. While your steak is coming up to temperature, let's talk seasoning. Now, a good piece of steak doesn't need much. Quality beef should be the star of the show, and our role is to enhance its natural flavors, not mask them. So, we're keeping it simple. Salt and pepper. Let's start with the salt. You want to use a coarse salt like kosher or sea salt. Why? Because the large grains will create a beautiful crust on the steak, adding texture and flavor. You want to be generous with your salt. Remember, this is a thick cut of meat, and that salt needs to penetrate all the way through. Don't be shy, give it a good sprinkle on both sides. Next comes the pepper. Freshly ground black pepper is best. It has a robust flavor that can stand up to the beef and the high heat of cooking. Just like the salt, give both sides of your steak a good dusting. Once your steak is seasoned, it's time to let it rest again. This rest allows the salt to penetrate the meat, adding flavor throughout, and it gives the meat time to absorb the pepper. This rest also brings the steak up to room temperature, ensuring an even cook. Take this moment to appreciate your work so far. Look at that steak. The salt and pepper creating a speckled crust, promising a world of flavor. It's almost a shame we have to cook it. Almost. With the steak prepared, we move on to the cooking process. Now comes the exciting part, cooking the steak. We've prepared our steak and now it's time to get it sizzling. The first thing we need to do is heat up our pan. Choose a heavy-duty, heat-responsive pan. Cast iron is a classic choice. You want to get it really hot so that we can sear the steak properly, creating that desirable, mouth-watering crust. Once your pan is heated, it's time to place your steak. Be cautious as you lower the steak onto the pan. The reaction will be instantaneous, creating a sizzle that's music to any steak lover's ears. Let the steak sear undisturbed. This is not the time to be impatient or fidgety. It's a crucial step in ensuring that the steak gets a flavorful caramelized crust. As the steak cooks, you'll notice the sides start to change color, turning from a raw red to a cooked brown. This is a good sign and an indicator that it's nearly time to flip the steak. A good rule of thumb is to cook the steak for about 2 to 3 minutes on each side for a medium rare finish. But of course, this will depend on the thickness of your steak and your personal preference. Now here's a tip that might surprise you. You don't need a spatula or tongs to flip the steak. Instead, you can use a fork. Simply pierce the steak at one end and flip it over. This method ensures the steak stays flat against the pan for even cooking. After the flip, it's more of the same. Let the steak sear undisturbed. As it cooks, the aromas will intensify, filling your kitchen with that unmistakable scent of cooking steak. It's a smell that's almost as good as the taste itself. So, how do you know when your steak is done? There's an easy way to check: the touch test. Gently press the center of the steak with your finger. If it's soft and springs back easily, it's rare. If it's firm, but still has some give, that's medium. And if it's very firm with little to no give, it's well done. That being said, everyone has their own idea of the perfect steak, so feel free to adjust the cooking time to achieve your desired level of doneness. Remember, it's better to err on the side of undercooking, as you can always put the steak back on the pan, but you can't uncook an overdone steak. With our steak cooked to perfection, it's time to add some flavor. But that's a story for the next part of our journey. For now, let's revel in the satisfaction of having cooked a steak that's sure to make taste buds dance with delight. To elevate the taste of our steak, we will now add a delicious butter mixture. This mixture isn't just any old spread, folks. It's a symphony of flavors that will take our steak from good to absolutely divine. First things first, let's make our butter mixture. Grab a small bowl and add in a generous amount of softened, unsalted butter. You want it nice and soft, not melted, so that we can mix in our other ingredients evenly. Now, let's add a bit of a kick to our butter. We're going to press or finely chop 2 cloves of garlic and add them to the bowl. Garlic brings a punch of flavor that pairs beautifully with the rich, savory taste of our steak. Next, let's add a touch of freshness with some finely chopped rosemary. Rosemary has a pine-like flavor that really elevates the butter mixture and adds a wonderful aromatic touch to our steak. Now, using a fork or a small whisk, we're going to mix everything together until it's well combined. Now comes the magic moment. We're going to apply this butter mixture to our steak. But we're not just slathering it on. Oh no, we're going to get a bit fancy here. We're going to spoon the butter mixture onto a piece of plastic wrap or parchment paper, and then we're going to roll it up into a log. Chill it in the fridge for a few minutes until it's firm. Once our butter log is chilled, we're going to slice it into rounds and place them on top of our hot, cooked steak. The heat from the steak will melt the butter, allowing it to seep into the steak, infusing it with a burst of garlicky, herby goodness. It's like a flavor explosion in every bite. With the butter mixture applied, our steak is almost ready to be served. I can almost taste the buttery, garlicky, rosemary-infused deliciousness. Can't you? The final step in cooking the perfect butter steak is to let it rest. Yes, you heard it right. Just like us, our steak needs a bit of relaxation after a sizzling dance on the pan. See, when we cook the steak, the heat causes the juices to rush towards the center of the steak. If we were to cut into the steak right away, those juices would escape, leaving us with a dry, less flavorful piece of meat. But by letting the steak rest, we give these juices time to redistribute throughout the steak. The result? Each bite is juicy, tender, and packed full of that buttery, steaky goodness. So how long should you let it rest? As a rule of thumb, 5 minutes per inch of thickness should do the trick. But if you have a particularly thick steak, you may want to let it rest for up to 15 minutes. Just remember, patience is key here. And trust me, the wait is well worth it. While the steak is resting, you can use this time to set the table, pour a glass of your favorite wine, or even whip up a quick side dish. When the time's up, slice the steak against the grain for maximum tenderness and serve it up. There you have it, a perfect butter steak cooked right at home. Now go ahead and enjoy your homemade gourmet meal.